Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jim Schottenham, curator here at the American Museum of Fly Fishing. And we're coming to you live from the Selch Backwind Fly Room here in Manchester, Vermont. And today I have the good fortune of sitting next to Scott Biron, who is one of our museum ambassadors. Scott is an incredibly talented tyer, knows a tremendous amount of knowledge on streamer flies. Scott is currently a member of the HMH Pro staff. He's also on the Partridge Hook Pro staff. And Scott, tell us a little bit about your association with Ewing.
So Ewing Featherbirds, they have produced a line of streamer feathers under using my name. We'll use them today. And that really, I just help advise them on the colors and the shape of the feathers. And they do a great job. Cole and Doug Ewing do a great job of dyeing them the right way. And we've been able to bring back some colors. Like the one we're going to use today is when we get to it, it's kind of a unique color that we had to have dyed special for this fly.
Okay, great. So people like to put a beginning date and kind of have an origin story. So we're going to break things down from the start. Let's begin with what exactly is a streamer fly? What's your definition of a streamer?
Yeah, I usually describe it as it's a fly. It's usually a little bit longer than what you would normally see a dry fly or a nymph, but it's usually imitating some type of bait fish. Oftentimes smelt. The bigger ones are for smelt, but then there are a lot of small dace flies that have been created throughout the years, and sometimes they're attractors. They don't really imitate anything. They just trigger a response in the fish. Like, for example, a Mickey fin or a Liggett special. You look at them and they're yellow and red, and there's nothing that they imitate. But there's others that might imitate a yellow perch or a smelt, like you said before. So they're pretty much a bait fish.
Okay. And is there such a thing as the first streamer fly? Is there a definitive point where we can say that's when they were originated, and we have a person we can attribute that to?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think it's really a learning. I think you point back to like the late 1800s, could have been in the Catskills, could have been in New England. Remember, we didn't have press a button, go online and look something up. These people, was word of mouth. But I would imagine that probably before that, the Native Americans somehow were fashioning feathers on bone hooks that they made, and they were probably fishing flies. Now, whether they were streamer-like or not, but I would imagine they were pretty smart to know that big fish eat small fish, and they might have created something and fashioned it on that. But if you look at the kind of some of the written history, you'll see that in the late 1800s, streamers started to come out of the Catskill area. Rod makers, bamboo rod makers started fashioning rods that could cast bigger flies.
Okay.
So in response to these flies being created, that was occurring. So you can kind of point back to that in America. I'm sure in Europe there was some types of streamers. There are lake flies that were eventually morphed into different types of streamers as well. But I would say, the 1920s to the 1940s was the heyday of streamers. So that's where most of the people, Leslie Hilliard and his father wrote a book on Carrie Stevens, really a lot of research into that. They also have done one on Herb Welsh. And I think as they were uncovering things, they were getting some, being able to uncover some of the history. However, I mentioned this to you when we were talking this morning. I was in Rangeley a couple of weeks ago at the White Nose Pete Festival, and Leslie came in with a frame that he wanted to show me, and on the bottom of the frame was a fly called the Gray Wizard, and it was Carrie Stevens' fly, and it was in one of her packages. And the wizard fly was a very popular pattern that she tied, but he had never seen the Gray Wizard. So every single time we open up a door, we find out something new.
Which is usually the case when you're researching any angling history. We're always uncovering new facts which makes this hobby so much fun, especially for researchers and collectors. The other thing that we talked about earlier that I think people will find interesting, you mentioned that there were a couple of tires that lived incredibly close to one another, but were completely unaware of each other.
Yeah, well, at least at the beginning, Herb Welsh and Carrie Stevens were very close. I've driven that from across into Rangeley, and it's not that far. And but they were in two different worlds. She tied some of his patterns, and he probably tied some of her patterns. But you know, did they attribute the pattern to each other? I'm not sure they knew that. I'm sure that someone came over and said, I need you to tie this fly, and they ripped off a few, and you know, but that's just the way it was, you know. And we also talked this morning, a lot of these fly tires went to the grave with their information, and also the secret society of fly tires that never wanted to share any of their information either. So you know, it is always had that kind of, you know, you're stirring the pot to try to find things out, but that's why, like you said, it's so much fun to uncover new things.
It is, and I dare say right now, streamer flies are probably some of the most popular among collectors. There seems to be a resurgence, if you will, of people actively seeking out some of the earlier patterns. Speaking of some of the patterns and their naming conventions, most fly tires that have delved into history at all are familiar with Mary Orvis Marbury and her work to standardize patterns and their names. Was there difficulty for anglers early on, late 1800s, early 1900s, that wanted to say order a particular fly or pattern for their area of, say, Maine or New Hampshire, but they would order something from one person and another person thinking they're producing the same fly, it would be completely different?
Yeah, the dye lots were that different. There is a photograph of probably a dozen to 16 of Carrie Stevens gray ghosts. Every one of them is a different shade, and it was hard to get the dye lot. There are some streamer fly tires like Jim Warner, who had a lake smelt. He had one cape of a certain color, and he tied that fly until he ran out of feathers, and he never was able to reproduce those feathers again. So yes, and you can see little differences in the same tire tying the same fly,
Okay.
because the materials changed, or they ran out of longer silver pheasant crest. They just weren't long enough to put on top of a 9X or a 10X hook, so they had to go to ostrich. So there are differences, and there are some that you can date the history of the fly by how the tire was tied as well.
That makes good sense. And because of those variations in patterns, is it difficult sometimes to positively identify a particular streamer by the tire?
Yes, I think there are some people that are really good. They focused on a certain tire, and they're able to identify that tire, whether there's anything written about that fly. Just even a fly that might have been fished,
Okay.
they're able to tell that. But there's, you know, there were a lot of people that knocked off tires, changed their lettering just a little bit on how they made their fly cards that they, you know, put inside the cellophane. But it is, for me, the easiest way is if I have some of the tires flies, I can usually tell this individual always tied with 3/0 monocoil, so that the heads are all big. If all of a sudden you see these tiny little heads, you're saying to yourself, the guy never tied with anything smaller than 3/0 monocoil, so he should have big heads.
Okay.
So things like that.
And I do remember that there was at least one tire, or I think they were brothers, the Laterno flies. Didn't they attempt to patent their flies?
Yes, so there are three of these cronies that used to fish together. Sanborn, who was a chiropractor, Gene Laterno, who was a writer for Garnet newspapers in Maine, and his brother Emil, and Emil worked at Hathaway Shirt Company.
Okay.
And these guys were hardcore, get in the boat, figure out what's going to catch fish. And they had been using the long hooks, and they were getting a lot of short strikes from the salmon and the big brook trout. So what they did was they actually email was the big tire. He went back and he took a hook and he sawed off the eye of the hook, and he connected two hooks with a piece of gut. And here it is. This is it's not, I didn't cut anything and it's not gut, it's more modern, but this is the fly they came up with called the Sportsman Say. And that was the name of the newspaper column that his brother Gene wrote. So that's why they named it. But if you look at this real carefully, you'll see that the bend of the back hook is even with the feather.
Okay.
And this was to prevent short strikes, but also give them the appearance of a big bait fish. They did go to the US Patent Office. They filed for a patent for tandem flies, and they were denied because there were too many variations for them to really be able to enforce the patent.
Gotcha. And of course, not everyone was very secretive about their patterns. And I believe Joe Brooks was instrumental in teaching a number of tires, of course, and most importantly, was friends with one gentleman that we're going to talk extensively about today.
Yeah, we're going to talk about Ray Salminen, and he was really great fly tire. I grew up in Acton, Massachusetts. He lived around the corner. I delivered newspapers to his house, and I went to school with his daughter and still keep in touch with her. And he was a unique guy because he was Joe Bates's best buddy. Joe Brooks. They went over to Megan Boyd, and he was a real outdoors person. And Ray, one thing that Ray did was he taught in the local community ed program, Fly Time, for years. This was somebody who gave back all his knowledge. It's just incredible. So you have people who don't want to share, and then you have people that just are so willing to share. Yeah.
Well, speaking of sharing, Ray was kind enough to gift to the museum this wonderful framed piece that has a number of his streamer patterns. And in fact, there's a photo of Ray in the center holding a couple of nice salmon. The patterns here, and forgive me for ducking out, but there's a Shang Special, Supervisor, Blue Devil, Morning Glory, Green Beauty, Red Ghost, Gray Glory, Black Ghost, Gray Ghost, and a Colonel Bates. So this is a nice addition to the museum. And Scott, you're going to be tying up for us today.
Yeah, we're going to do the Gray Glory, which was a tandem here, and it was created for Moosehead Lake, and it was created for where the outlet of the Moose River comes in. There's some pretty dark smell and good size smell, and it's a working pattern. It's got materials on it that are very strong. It'll take a beating, as most salmon will ambush the front hook and then come around and try to attack the rear hook.
Gotcha.
And it's really cool because when I first mentioned that I was going to do this, I had a couple of people reach out to me and say, I used to fish up there when Ray and his buddies were up there, and that was the only fly that they really used. And Ray's got a kind of, he got turned on to fly tying by LL Bean.
Okay.
And LL Bean showed him a bucktail pattern. He really got into the streamers, and he went on. And this Gray Glory is not one that you see too often. And a friend of mine, Guido Lippo, brought an article from an old magazine to me like 2 years ago and showed me this pattern. And it had a lot. Ray had written the article with some of the history, so it gets validated by the people who've seen it. And I tied a couple for a guy who took him up the Moosehead, and he sent me pictures of all the salmon he got.
Oh,
so
that's pretty great.
Yeah, it was good. Yeah.
It's wonderful to see that sort of thing. Well, listen, I'm going to stop yakking, and we'll focus in the camera, and Scott's going to start tying up for us.
Perfect.
So let's get the camera in position.
Are we looking good?
I think we're looking okay. What do you think?
Okay, perfect. So what we're going to do here is we're going to tie a tandem, and I'll give you a little bit of information, and when we post this online, we'll have the whole recipe for you if you have any questions about it. But what I'm going to use here is a partridge hook, and then I use these Wet Fly Supreme hooks. They're G3AL. We use a size 4 for the front hook and a size 6 for the back. That's kind of traditionally what we use for tandems. The one thing about these hooks are they're really stout. They're very, very stout and strong, so they can take a real beating. Now, you're going to see both my hooks are down. They're going to be pointing down. And a lot of times you'll see trolling flies, then the tandems have the back hook up and the front hook down. And the reasoning for that was they didn't want, if they were trolling low in the summer, they didn't want it to hook on something and break off on the bottom. But one of the things is that if the top hook is up and the salmon or the trout hits the front hook, sometimes the back hook comes around and pokes them in the eye and it can kill them. So this is a safer way of doing it. So basically what we're going to do here is we're going to build the back hook, and I just get a little bit of, on this back hook, I'm going to use all black thread. But on this back hook, I'm going to put a little bit of black thread on it. And then I'm going to kind of go through this little gymnastic thing where I kind of open spiral like a barber pole back and forth a couple times. And that gives me a little bit more real estate when I'm going to glue on and tie in the wire. Now, the wire could be looked at a couple different ways. Some people use steel on, like Jim Warner from Lake Winnipesaukee always used steel on. It's a wire that's got a little bit of plastic coating on the outside, but Ray used this Mason multi-strand stainless steel wire, no coating. It's really strong and it's very durable. So we're going to use what he used. So I just invert the hook, and I'm just going to put a couple wraps on the bottom here. And what I want to do is just make sure it's lined up. And I don't know if you can see that, but that wire is lined up directly on the bottom of the shank. And that's the key. If it kinks to one side, that's going to be a big problem. It's going to get some thread on it to hold it in place. And then what I'm going to do is take a little bit of Zap-A-Gap, super glue, whatever you want to use, and just put a little bit on here. And that's just going to make it, and then I just kind of rub it in place a little bit, make sure it fills in all those incongruencies of where I had the thread. And then I'm going to take this back, and I don't really need to have a real, I'm not using floss, so I don't need to really have a smooth body with this. And then the back of this, the back hook is going to be Mylar. I'm sure that depending upon when this came about, they might have used real metal tinsel, but we use this, or I use this Mylar. And then once I get it in place, I'm going to wind forward. It really locks it in place. Now, this is going to make a very durable body because we're winding over some wet super glue. And the only downside to the super glue is sometimes it leaves a little bit of white on the Mylar, but you can, there's a workaround with everything in fly tying. All right, so we have it in place there. And typically what I would do is I build a nice strong head on this. Now, if you were doing a floss body fly, you would have to wait for that super glue to completely dry before you would be able to put the body, the floss on it. But with this, we don't have to do that. Now, tandem tires need long whip finish for the back. I do a couple 3-turn, 4-turn whip finishes. You could do half hitches if you want to. These just are so much stronger. And then trim it off. And typically what I would do is I'm kind of, this is a brushing, this is Minwax brushing varnish. We used to use Sheffield varnish from Sheffield, England, but they don't make it anymore. So we use this. And typically what I do is I have it cut. If you see all these different bottles, this one, the small bottle, is pretty clear looking. And it's probably 40% varnish and 60% solvent. And then the darker bottle is definitely going to be the almost 100%. But that helps. A lot of people use UV, but UV really doesn't sink into the threads very well. Plus, it's pretty toxic. Okay, so now you're going to see me move to white thread. The only reason for that is we're going to tie in some materials, and I don't want the black thread to necessarily be showing through the white belly that we're going to use. And so what I do is pretty much the same thing. I kind of do some open spirals to get some extra real estate so that the glue will get in nice and even. And what I really want to do here is line this up and make sure it's right in position and it's not twisted. And it can get twisted as the thread tension comes over the top of the wire. It wants to encourage it to kind of go along with that thread tension. But if you just kind of lay it in place and you're really putting the tension on as you come up, you're going to be in a much better position. And then you just want to double check. This is the time you can fix anything. You can kind of fix it with your fingernail. And so if you can see that, it's really laid in there pretty good. And it should be perfect for us to build our body. And so I do the same thing, a little bit more of the messy Zappagat. And some tires will varnish over the body to make sure that it really stays together, because your salmon have pretty strong teeth, your brook trout, your lake trout, whatever you're fishing for, and they can really beat up your bodies. And that's why, historically, we were talking about different things and different changes. A lot of these flies started by being floss body flies with a mylar rib or metal tinsel rib, and then they morphed into a body that had total silver, gold, copper, tinsel, because the durability was increased by using that. A lot of tires in New Hampshire, and Ray's wife was from the Tamworth area. And so he was a big Belknap guy. He had a fly called the Belknap, a little streamer fly, kind of like almost like a black nose dace type fly. And a lot of the New Hampshire people went to a copper color. And it made a big difference, increased the fish catching ability. Of course, I would have to drop my material here. So now we're gonna put a belly on it. So the hook is all squared away, ready to go here, and we're gonna put a belly on it. So not all bucktail is created equal. And when you see flies with bucktail that's perfectly straight, it's because the tire has taken a woman's hair straightener and they actually straightened the bucktail with it, which is makes the fly look really good in a frame. But in realistically, the bucktail's curly. It's got different types of thickness, thin and brittle at the tips, thick at the base. So when you talk about taking bucktail, you're taking it from in here, the meat area, and you can see where you can see right here where it gets dark there. You can see I've been poaching on this one quite a bit. So you take the bucktail out, and this is a big thing for a lot of people. When you read in a lot of these recipes, it says sparse, and sparse is really sparse because when bucktail gets wet, it looks a lot bigger underwater than it really is. And in fact, if you have a bucktail belly that's too thick, what'll happen is when you start to troll or retrieve your fly, it'll actually invert the fly so it'll be upside down, which is what you don't want. So I put my hair in a hair stacker, and there's probably way more than I need here. I'm just going to pull it out, and I don't really care if the tips are all aligned, but I want them pretty much to be aligned on this. And then I start culling the stuff out, and I'm looking to see if there's any like 90-degree turns or anything like that. But I'm trying to get that bucktail to just kind of come together, and I rotate my fingers a little bit, and it kind of gets the fibers to sneak together. And then I look, is there anything with a 90-degree turn? I'll just take it out. The fish don't care. The tire does. All right, now there's a bunch of different ways to tie in bucktail. I just do it my way. And basically what I do is I size it to where I want it. It's another shorty in there. I size it, and I want this just to stick out a little bit beyond the rear hook. And I measure it, and then I cut it. I trim it. Now, some people will take a little bit of head cement and stick it on it, and then tie it in place, which is fine. And it compresses the fibers when you do that. And it also helps them to become really solid. But what I try to do is I put a couple really moderately tight wraps on the loose, moderate side. Probably best to describe it that way. And then as I go forward, towards the eye of the hook, I tie them, I snug it up a little bit tighter. And the reason for that is if you put it right in, right at the tying point, and you crank it down and tie it with a lot of force, what's going to happen is you're going to flare it. And so it's not going to be streamlined. So what I cut off to start with was probably about 24 fibers. And I bet if I have 12 here left. So it's kind of survival of the fittest a little bit, but you don't want to overdo it. And I always, at this point, hit it with a little head cement. And that stuff is going to varnish. It's just going to really get itself so that it hardens up while I'm getting the next material, which is going to be an underwing. And this underwing is going to be peacock curl. And I trimmed this up because I didn't want to bring a big hunk of peacock curl that was 4 feet tall. And this is on the bronze color side. So how do you get bronze peacock curl? You basically let it sit out in the sun a little bit, or you spend a lot of money and you buy what somebody's selling as bronze peacock curl. But if you stick it in the window for a little bit, it will become bronze. This is going to give that fly kind of a lateral line, and there you go, lay it in place. And I don't want this to be any longer than the bucktail. And I'm going to lay this in. There's 6 strands there, 4 to 6 strands. On a tandem, I always use 6 strands because this is going to be the weakest link in that. And if you notice, I cut the bucktail off before I put it on, but I didn't cut the waist off of this, because if you cut it off, you don't really get it locked in well. And I'll give it a little bit of cement. Okay, perfect. Now, the wing. This is not a complex fly. The wing is made up of this slate gray. Think of those flagstones that you used to have growing up on your front walk. They were all that kind of dark blue, almost like a shiny submarine blue. This is what the slate would be for this fly. And basically what I'll explain to you is the Ewing streamer flies are feathers are really good because they have thinner stems, which gives the fly a lot of action in the water. And they're pretty consistent as they come up when you pick them off. And I'll show you. We're going to take four feathers make up this, 2 from each side. We're going to take 2 from over here and 2 from over here. And they will oppose each other when I tie them in. And when I tie them in, as they oppose each other, it'll give me a straight line. So I'm just gonna put this out of the picture for a second when I pick them. And these are really, like I said, they're perfect for streamers because they have a pretty consistent shape to them. All right, so if you see here, I've picked, there's 2 from one side right there. And you can see how they kind of come up towards a point and they have a little bit of a rounding to the point. And this is how I do all my flies. I just simply line up the feather where I want it to get tied in. And I just make a little notch in the top of the feather. And then then I strip the bottom fibers off. And then this becomes my template for the remaining 3 feathers. If I was tying a dozen of these, this would be the template for the entire dozen. When I teach a lot of the streamer classes, I'll see somebody a year after they took a class and I'll say, how's it going? And they'll go, everything's good except for I can't get my wings to all be the same length. And as I question them a little bit and ask them how are they sizing their wings up, they tell me what they do is they take their first measurement and then they take this one, which is the second one, the one we made off the template, and they use that to size the third one. And so if there's a little bit of difference in these, then they're making it a little bit longer or a little bit shorter. So that's one of the reasons why they don't all line up. That's a tires tip from today. I won't charge you extra for that. And once you get used to doing this and you're not worried about a camera and all sorts of lovely things around that, you can really move with these and pull these together pretty quick. The other thing is, you can't see it, but I'll show it to you in a minute. On my bench in front of me, I have what is a piece of the heavy cardboard matting that they use for photographs. And a friend of mine, Peggy Brenner, showed me this. And what we do is we go out and go to one of the craft stores and we buy, I'll show it to you right here. From 1 second. We buy this felt and it had sticky on the back and we put it onto that mat board. And that will hold these feathers in a position So if the wind blows or the cat jumps on the table or the dog, I don't have cats, but if the dog jumps on the table, they're not going all over the place, and you know you have your lefts and your rights. Okay, now, so this particular pattern appears to be tied, that Ray tied it with the feathers on top of the hook. Herb Welsh, Black Ghost, his stems feathers were tied on top of the hook. Now, Carrie Stevens, she didn't have a vise, and she tied hers on either side of the shank, kind of like 10 or 2, 11 and 1, you know, whatever. She assembled all her materials before she put them on. So she would put her shoulder, her jungle cock, her wings, all would be assembled before as one unit. Here, I'm going to do it a little bit different. I'm going to do it by taking this stuff here called tear mender. It's a waterproof latex. So if you're allergic to latex, you don't want to use it. But I put a slight bead right on that stem, about 1/4 inch up. And I actually take my bodkin and I roll it as I pull it back so that there's not a big clump there. And then I just sandwich these babies together, making sure the tips are right. And I clean my bodkin. This is another tires tip, because this stuff will set up pretty quick. I clean my bodkin. Do it again. And again, if I was tying 12, I'd be putting 24 of these wings together all at once. And as we're talking here, that first one is probably pretty close to being dropped. All right. Now, the next most important thing is we're going to get ready to, and I still got white thread. I'm going to switch to black in a few minutes here, but we're going to put a couple more materials in place and then we'll switch to black. So what I'm using is a tires wax. This is really versatile. It's kind of a medium wax. Even though the thread is wax, what I'm doing right now is melting the wax onto my thread. And when I take my wings and put them in position, put my wings in position. As I tie the wing in place, I put about 3 wraps on. What's happening there with that wing, I got that wing in place. It's not in tight or anything like that. But as I wrapped, that wax melted again. And it melts and it holds those wings in position. And if you look, I'm always pinching my wings with my middle and my thumb, not with my pinky and my thumb, because you don't get as much real estate on the skin, and this holds it in perfect position. A great salmon fly tyer named Charlie Shute showed me that. And so now look at that wing. See how straight it is right along the shank? It's got a nice curve to it. You get that lateral line from the peacock curl, so it's perfect. And the cool part about this is when this gets wet, this is going to slim down to nothing. You see this big broad wing right now, but it's not going to have much wing when we're done, when it gets wet. Okay, the next material is lemon wood duck. So we got a couple. This is going to be the shoulder, and it's just regular old lemon wood duck. And the way the recipe reads is it's slightly longer than the front hook. So I'm just going to get rid of some of the garbage. And the cool part about wood duck is it is really versatile. It can take a beating and keep going. So if anything gets beat up from the salmon on this fly, it's going to be it's not going to be the wood duck. It's going to last. That's why I think the Catskill fly tyers that use the wood duck. not only for its coloring, but for their wings, because it was so much stronger than mallard or anything like that. Okay, so there's our shoulder. Put the far one in first. Couple wraps. Take a look, looks good. The near one in. Couple wraps. Looks good, it's in good position. Now, I knew when I was talking, I moved my bodkin and I have to, from my bobbin here, and I have to rethread it. I have one of these old Orvis threaders. Oh, I mean Orvis bobbins. It's I know they haven't made these for years. This is my favorite bobbin. Right in the middle of the show. 6.0 Danville Flymaster. This is a really versatile thread for streamer. Some of the stronger threads out there that are thinner will actually cut your bucktail and your peacock curl when you're tying them in, because they just they don't. Wouldn't we know this would happen today, Jim? Coming, but it's not up there far enough. There we go. All right, we're all set. Sorry about that. So now I'm going to switch off. Going to introduce the black thread, which is what I want for the head. And I suppose if you wanted to, you could switch to a thinner thread, like maybe a 12.0 or a 14.0 Vivus here, to get the head, the black in, if you didn't want to build up your head. But a lot of streamer flies have a big head. A lot of them have painted eyes, and they need the big head for the painted eyes. So I'm just going to get that in place, because I only have one more material that we're going to put in. We're going to put in the jungle cock eye. Take two here. Let's see if we can get two that are. I suppose we can do this and show you the cool way. Okay, so there are two. This one is split right down the middle. The fish won't care about that, but I will. So we'll fix it. And we'll just strip it down to what we want it to look like. And then we'll take a little bit of Dave's Flex Cement. And this is gooey. Put it on the back and just run my finger through that wet Flex Cement, and it's just mended the split. So a lot of people, they get all upset. These birds, the jungle cock, they don't like each other, so they beat each other up, and that's one of the reasons why they have a lot of splits in them. And sometimes you'll have you'll need longer eyes, and sometimes you'll want shorter eyes. Now, I use this stuff here called Fabric Fusion. I could use the tear mender, but I think the tear mender gets a little too thick. It's overkill for the back of the jungle cock. So all I'm going to do is take and put a little bit of this Fabric Fusion. And again, it's really durable. You'll lay it in place. There it is, and the same thing for this side. Okay, perfect. We're almost done. All right, now it goes to cutting pieces off. So all I do is kind of reverse order how I put things on. So the stems of the jungle cock come off. Wood duck. And then I take a couple snips to get off the wings. And then I'm going to build the head. Start at the front behind the eye. We got to build some real estate up here because we've got a lot of material, and we also have that tandem material that's holding this together. So we lay some and build it up. And as we start to build up, we work back and forth. But always from the front to the back with the streamer. It works a lot easier that way. And now we kind of got that slope taken care of. And now we're going to look for that bullet-shaped head.
That, how important is it to get that bullet shaped?
Yeah, I think it's more for the, heads are tire signatures, I think. If you looked at Carrie Stevens, you saw hers. Then Wendell Folkens took over her, and he tied with a lot longer head. And I think part of that might have been the shape of the return eye on the hooks he was using. So what you want to make sure is that it's got a shape that is tapered, thinner in the front, thicker in the back. That's the key. And again, I'm whip finishing a couple times here, and then it's simply a series of treatments with the varnish. So the real cut thin varnish is going to get on that first, and while I'm talking to you here, it's going to really penetrate that whole body of that head of the fly. And in probably 2-3 minutes, it's not going to look like it's wet at all. It's sucked right in. So it's really bounded in very good. And then I always put 2 coats of that on, and then I kind of have that I would say is a 40% varnish, 60%, or 30-70, and then I build up to like maybe a 60% varnish, 40 cut, and then I go to the full dose. And the full dose will really give you that shiny head, much more durable. But that's your gray glory, and it is cool because from the standpoint of smelt in Maine, the water in some of the lakes in Maine is tan in color, so it's got that kind of rusty look to it because the leaves are decomposing, and this dark coloring on this fly gives it a really good appearance of being a really strong smelt pattern bait fish. And the brook trout and the salmon really like this type of fly. The shoulder gives you that look of the colors of the cheeks of a bait fish. And we know smelt take on different colors, different times of the day, different lighting, different water. But for the Moose River outlet, that's your deal right there.
Awesome. And I'd like to share with everyone that Scott has generously agreed to include this exact fly for our upcoming festival here in Manchester on August 12th. It's a Saturday. Scott will be on hand, and you'll be able to start purchasing tickets, raffle tickets for the event starting August 1st. So I think it would be pretty cool to have the fly instruction video that we have that'll be up on our website, and you'll be able to have an opportunity to win this exact fly. And of course, meet Scott, who I'd like to thank profusely for coming out today. It was a wonderful instruction. wonderful to learn about some of the streamer history. And as Scott pointed out earlier, we're always finding out new information about some of the historic tires and their patterns and their ways. Scott, I can't
Thanks,
thank you
Jim.
enough.
I had a great time. Thanks for having me. I'll come again.
Sounds great. We'll see you in August.
All right, I'll be here in August. Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you.